a quarter century of building breweries and helping them grow. And so I'm building a brewery right now, right over that way, a couple blocks. It's actually number 5 that I've done in this neighborhood over the last couple dozen years. So I have a habit of doing this. I don't know why, but if you like talking about breweries and technical brewing subjects and that kind of stuff, check out the MBAA. It's a national organization, but it also has local districts. So District Midwest represents Ohio, part of Kentucky, and Indiana. And I just happen to be the president of the district, so that's my shameless plug. Come and attend those meetings.
Conference.
And there's a conference coming up in February, which is the Ohio Craft Brewers Guild Conference, but we will also be there as the MBAA giving a little talk on yeast and yeast management. And then we'll be tagging our meeting on at the end. So good stuff there. All right, so here's my 10 thoughts. And I can do this in 3 or 4 hours, or I could do it in probably 10 minutes if I need to. Mary's probably thinking 10 minutes sounds pretty good. So everybody has a brewery, right? It looks like that. Maybe not. That's in Regensburg. It's a very sexy little place. But how many of you have a small brewery or a brewery of any size and you're looking to expand and to grow? A couple of you. All right. And how many of you don't have a brewery yet and you want to build one? A couple more. All right. Good. Coincidentally, I'll be doing another talk at said conference in February, kind of on the same subject, but expanding it, probably focusing more on small-scale startups and some of the things you need to think about. So, here we go. First question I like to ask anybody is, do you really have an idea of where you're going when you want to expand your brewery or build a new brewery? Because in this game, the ducks are moving, and moving targets are very hard to hit. So I've been challenged with this throughout my career, like, oh, let's grow and let's put in some more capacity. Okay, question. Then where do we want it to go to? What scale are we talking about? What's the end game? And if the answer comes back, well, we don't know yet, that makes it very hard to install a bunch of equipment size to meet the unknown. So you have to have some kind of a business plan focused around it. Have some realistic expectations. And this especially comes into budgeting. A lot of times the budgeting question comes up, the owner of the brewery comes up and says, so got a minute? Let's just have a chat. So what's this new boiler going to cost? I don't know. Well, give me a range. Okay, $10,000 to $100,000. Okay, let's just pencil in $10,000. And then you have to kind of say, let's put some time around the budgeting process if we can. So yeah, write 10,000 down, but give me 2 months to pull in some real quotes, and then understand that those quotes are usually just kind of a budgetary across the top kind of quote. And as you really dig into it, what you really need, there's a lot of ancillary stuff that often comes with it that drives the price up. So I'm not saying that the brewer should not be accountable for selecting the equipment when the cost overruns happen, but you have to be realistic about where the costs are coming from originally, and you can't just take wild-ass guesses and expect to hit the target every time. Another example of that, when I was at Dogfish Head a couple of years ago, about 8 years ago, the brewery was at 20,000 barrels, and we wanted to grow, so we were going to buy some fermenters. And I asked the owner, Sam, I said, so, where are we going with this thing? What's the goal? And he kind of gave me this glazy-eyed look of like, nah, I don't know. I said, well, give me a number. Well, 40,000 barrels. That'll be great. Okay, so I started thinking about putting in a little bit of piping. So I chose some 1.5-inch pipe, and we ran a couple of lines from over here to this part of the cellar. It was hard to reach with hoses. Exactly 1 year later, ripped all those lines out because now we were going for 80,000 barrels. And then the 80 turned into 150, and now it's, I think, 600 is what they're looking at. So, you need to have a target. That's what I'm trying to say. All right, so a lot of times people jump from a small brewery to another brewery because they feel they're out of capacity. And a lot of times it's true. You build a small brewery, it tends to have a very small footprint, you get pretty crowded. But sometimes you can work around that depending on what that goal is, if you have a firm understanding of what that goal is for the growth. So maybe you can improve what you've already got and make it work, maybe not long term, but maybe sometimes short term is important. So another example from Dogfish, we were at about 40,000 barrels, We had a real piece of shit brew house that was just clanking along, not very effectively. And we wanted to grow, and we bought a new brew house, well, used, but we couldn't put it in yet because the building around it was still not done. So we're about a year away from being able to install that capacity, but we were ramping up and we weren't getting anywhere. So I took a look at the existing brew house and thought, well, maybe there's some things we could do. So we put in a weak wort tank, which is basically recovering your last runnings from your lauter tun, storing those. And in this case, the lauter tun was really badly designed. So it had about 5 barrels of underlet that you pushed under the screens, before you put the next mash on top. So instead of using water for that, on our stronger beers, we'd use this weak wort, which actually wasn't that weak. It was about 9 or 10 Plato a lot of times. So that helped. So the first brew, you brew it as normal, but then the second brew, you'd use that weak wort, and you'd get some extra barrelage that way. Then we added a dedicated whirlpool tank, which I just fabbed up out of an old open top fermenter. Just put a lid on it, so the net result of those two things was we started picking up an average of 3 barrels extra on every brew on what was nominally a 50-barrel brew house. So it was pretty good return on investment for a bunch of tanks and stuff that was just laying around in the scrapyard. Paid for itself probably in about 6 weeks, I think. You can also do things like put tanks outside. If you're landlocked, how landlocked are you? If you got a little courtyard, put some tanks out there. You can do it. Sometimes it works, but be aware of winter. So, thoughts on building a brewery. I like to say build it like a bathtub. And in this case, a clawfoot tub is my model because those things last forever. 100 plus years. So heavy duty, and notice all the sexy tile around that bathtub. I think tile is a very, very good thing for breweries. So here's a couple of examples. The one on the right is our brew pub. And so we've got the tile with a stainless steel drain in the center, everything's sloped to it. The tile rolls up the wall, stops a little bit at that red line there, but then we took more cosmetic tile, if you will, up even further to about 4 feet above the floor, although there's a window in this one, so it stops a little shorter. But the idea is you roll tile around just about everything you can, so you can imagine plugging the drain and flooding the whole space and going swimming if you want to. But you got to think about water's going to go everywhere inside a brewery. Same thing goes for your ceiling. Spec a really, really good, high quality, like marine grade, high gloss paint on the ceiling, and the contractor will look at you like, why do you want to do this on the ceiling? Well, picture 5 barrels of beer sprayed all over the ceiling. Oh, why would you do that? It's a brewery, dude. This is what happens. The other tile, the even fancier tile, that's our new brewery. So that's a system that has 3/4 inch thick tile, which is set in a 5-inch mortar bed with the regular concrete slab below it. And then these guys come over from Europe and they do all the sloping to drain, so you can spec whatever percent slope you want. And it's integrated with the drain system. So that's top notch. That's the best system you can find. That'll be in that brewery long after I'm pushing daisies. And it's about $20 a square foot. But this tile system costs anywhere from $10 to $12 a square foot. So, okay, it's double the cost, but this system at Market Gardens Pub is starting to look like that because what happens is we put in a plastic drain system, and it flexes with heat and chemical usage, and then as it flexes, water and chemical get around the edge and they undermine the concrete along the lip of the tile, and then the tile starts to collapse. So that's a problem. The new tile system, the fancy one there, that won't really have that problem, we hope. It comes with a 15-year warranty, so it's going to be good that long at least. And it's difficult because if you have to rip up a drain to replace it with a stainless steel liner, you're going to be down for, in the case we did it, it was 5 days. And in a brew pub where you brew a couple brews a week, maybe you can get away with 5 days downtime. But if you've got a production brewery and you're banging away every day, 5, 6, 7 days a week, finding that kind of downtime is pretty hard to do. This other system, this nightmare, is that's an epoxy coated floor that regrettably, I also put in, that's a Dogfish Head in their brew house. That was put in 2007, and these pictures are from 2 years ago. So it didn't last very long. And the lesson there is plastic drains suck, but also so does epoxy, because it all comes up and it comes up in sheets. At least you can fix sections of tile. Epoxy, you just kind of just start scraping the whole floor off, throw it in the dumpster and start over. But also intensity. The intensity of your operation is very important to try and figure out when you're installing any kind of a mechanical or structural system. So if you're going to be brewing 7 days a week, 6 or 8 brews a day, you need a very rugged substrate on which to work. If you're building a brew pub and you're going to brew 4 times a week, that's a different story. So, it all comes down to intensity of your operations. Also, forklifts. Forklifts are hell on floors. So, you probably already know that. I like to geek out on engineering a little bit whenever I can. So, and I especially like to engineer away problems. So, you build a brewery, you realize all these things you did wrong. What can we do when we go to expand, we have a little bit more money, or if we're going to build another place? What can we work around that was a problem in the past? First thing I see in most breweries is ergonomics, which is how do you move through your space? Are you always banging yourself on that one valve that sticks out, or the tank leg that's always getting a hose caught on it, or whatever? You have to kind of really think about your spaces. Make a drawing, picture yourself walking around. Sometimes just getting the equipment in there, setting it in place, looking at it, move it around a little bit, figure out a way to squeeze it in there more effectively. It's a good idea. It's a good exercise to go through. And any chance you get, eliminate or reduce noise. I think noise is the single biggest problem in a lot of breweries that is just not discussed or talked about because you can't hear yourselves talk, right? Especially if you're in a packaging brewery, there's an air compressor banging away over here. Maybe the boiler's roaring away over there. Bottles are clanging, kegs are banging, and what do you do to make it a better working environment? Turn up the radio, dude, so we don't have to hear all that noise. We'll just drown it out with more noise. Don't do that. First of all, you're inflicting your horrible music taste on everybody around you. So, it's just making everybody really angry. And you don't really need all that anger. If you can just quiet things down. Something I have to do is, if you have a pump, all breweries have multiple pumps, and they're usually running all the time. Make a little shroud around it. Roll some stainless steel. Pack it full of sound-absorbing insulation. You don't have to cover the whole pump because it needs to ventilate to keep it cool, but you can drop your pump noise 50% just by doing that little thing, and it's not very expensive. Anywhere you can, reduce heat point loads. So if you're putting in a new brew house and your old brew house was really, really hot, as they usually are, think about, okay, how are we going to ventilate this new brew house? What kind of airflow are we getting? And never listen to architects when it comes to anything like that, because they're all residential commercial. They'll say, 4 air changes, 6 air changes an hour is great. And that's when you say, great, we want 15. They'll be like, whoa, that's crazy. Yeah, I want to feel my hair moving like this, I want bugs in my teeth. But the other things you can do is insulate the top head of your boil kettle and your whirlpool tank. Those are the 2 biggest radiant heat sources in most breweries, and a lot of times they're just a single shell. Insulate it and clad it, costs a couple bucks, but now you're not going to be sweating all year long, So think about that. Anytime you can get rid of slippery floors or obstacles on floors like curbs, things like that, try and figure out a way to get around them. Usually the worst case scenario is you have a big concrete pad you poured in a warehouse floor so you could get your drainage. And then you have a curb around it to keep all the water on this side of the floor and not on that side, which is where you're running around with a forklift. The trouble is, miraculously, that water does somehow find its way onto the flat warehouse floor, and then the forklift comes flying around the corner, and it does this. Whee! And what forklifts weigh a lot, and it's got a pallet of beer on it, and the next thing you know, there's just bad things happening. What else? Anytime you can reduce waste in a new process, try to do it. One of the easiest things to do is just water reduction. How can you reuse it? How can you reduce it? Sometimes it's as simple as just putting a hose nozzle on every hose that you have for washdown. like not just the garden hose variety that you get at Home Depot that costs $6, but you replace every 6 weeks. Get the Straumann heavy duty ones, you know. Those things last forever. So if you spent $75 on the nozzle, but you don't have to change it for a couple of years, you're making a good investment. And I already said 86 the radios. You got to ask yourself about tours. Are you going to do tours in your new brewery? And most people like to show off their breweries, but I will just say one caveat. If you're not going to really think about tours and lay it out for tours, think about not giving tours. These are two breweries. They're in the town of Golden, Colorado. And the Shiny Copper one is a bigger brewery in Golden. You may have heard of it. It's called Coors. So they have a tour center, and they probably get 1,500 people a day through there. So they kind of thought this through. They probably got a PR and marketing company to kind of lay it out. So they have parts of the tour with little stations like this that are very nicely dressed up. But it was a good tour, but not a great tour, I think, because it was rather impersonal, not very human. They give you a little radio thing, you know, you walk through and you can look at the different points of it. And every now and then you go down a hallway and there's like a really unhappy looking employee handing out little samples. And, make your people smile if you're going to be on a tour. But then this other brewery with this trough of doom here, they are a very small brewery, and they have a little beer garden, and we went in there and said, hey, do you give tours? And the bartender's like, yeah, hang on a minute, I'll go open up the door. So it's a tiny little place. But he should have just said, no, we do not give tours. But instead he let us in. And this is the part sink, and it's got what to me looks like skim milk in it, and it's pretty disgusting. And right in the middle, there's a black spot. That's a dead fly. So I'm imagining the fly was just buzzing over and was overcome by fumes and just crashed. Poor thing. So anyway, if you're going to do tours, don't show off that. Every brewery's got parts you don't want to show off. You don't want to probably show your wastewater treatment plant off or your warehouse, but definitely don't show the place off if it looks like that. Get back to ergonomics for a second. You think about your spaces that you work in. There's an industrial program called 5S, which you can kind of summarize it as a place for everything and everything in its place. So try and think about how you're going to organize your space so you're just not tripping over stuff that shouldn't be there. So in this case, in our brew pub, we have this blue cart for moving bags of grain around when we're ready to mash the next one in. And it's got like these long kind of bars on the end. And so when it's full of grain, it's great. You just kind of move it around. But when it's not in use, we'll actually fold it up and tuck it between the fermenters so you're not just stepping over the thing all day long or moving it all over the place. So find a place if you can. Move stuff, between tanks, underneath tanks if you can. A lot of times you have more room than you really think you have. Then the other picture is, again, my favorite brewery up in Colorado there. So going from the kind of the left to the right, here's a ladder, this green ladder. That's how they got to the top of the boil kettle. I think there maybe should have been a platform kind of permanently mounted there instead of just a ladder that always sat there. And then they have this mezzanine up above. So they'd heat up water in the brew kettle, which is direct fired. They would pump it then up to this tank, which is the hot liquor tank. So now you've got 180 degree water above your head. And then this other converted dairy tank was the cold liquor tank. And so all the water is kind of just coming back down at you, which is fine. You got to be creative sometimes. But then, in the background, I don't know, some kind of a tool shed or something they had going on there. Maybe they were running some kind of parts fabrication for making bongs or something. But that just really didn't belong there as far as I was concerned. It's like, okay, you took a shed and turned it into a brewery, but take the shed components out that don't belong there and make the place more ergonomically successful, because if I died and went to hell, that's where I would end up probably, is working in there. Just not a happy situation. All right. Think about traffic flow in a brewery. Anytime you're designing a brewery, whether it's a tiny little one-man operation, or if it's a brew pub, or if it's a production brewery, traffic is what it's all about. You've got to get grain in, you've got to get grain out. You've got to get bottles and cans and kegs in, and you've got to get them out, right? and then there's traffic flow of people and machines inside the brewery. Forklifts especially, you don't want crossing routes. You know, think of a highway intersection. Where do accidents happen? Usually at intersections. And forklift accidents are just nasty. Here's a great example of the forklift full of kegs, just kind of, whoops, the truck pulled away and he was still there. It's actually a staged picture, but it's great. The other picture is actually at our new brewery on Bridge Avenue. The loading docks were built 60-odd years ago, so trucks were a lot smaller back then. So what the trucks have to do is actually back up over the sidewalk on the other side of the street and then to cut in. In this case, it was winter. The sidewalk had 3 feet of snow on it. Truck got stuck, and as he was rocking himself trying to get back out, he blew up his transmission, so he was there for a while. What you can't see on the other side of the truck, on the sidewalk, is a fire hydrant, which in the 3 years we've owned the building has been replaced 3 times from trucks knocking it over. So what we decided to do after doing a little traffic study is we're cutting our loading docks back 24 feet, and we're tearing off that face of the building to get a better turning radius for trucks. Seems a little counterintuitive, you know, is that you only got so much space. Why do you want to reduce the space? Well, you're reducing the space to get actually better traffic flow. So think about that, especially when it comes to tours, traffic flow of people through the facility. You know, don't have people walking across the warehouse with all the fork trucks buzzing back and forth to go to the tasting room. You know, try and keep them isolated. Keep the people out of the process. Keep the process out of the warehouse if you can. It's kind of an important thing. Makes for a lot of happiness or unhappiness depending on how you do it. And this is kind of an obvious one for a lot of brewers. Get rid of hoses anywhere you can. So you can either just delete them and put in piping. There's an old rule of thumb. Any hose that's laid in the same place for 2 weeks should be turned into a piece of pipe, right? And just mounted on the wall or along a tank leg or something. Shorten up hoses. You can do that by running pipe systems that you just connect short hoses to instead of having really long ones that you're dragging around. Also, you can shorten them by putting in retractable hose reels for things like washdown hoses, CO2 lines, air lines, electrical cords. You can drop them down from the ceiling. So these things cost a little bit of money, but you know that hose reel for the washdown was about $500. You know, and it's paid for itself, I think, in my own personal satisfaction many times over. And it gets things off the floor. You know, if you put just a regular coiled up washdown hose with a little hose rack on the wall, you really have to fight hard to get everybody to put that thing back and coil it up properly every time. The tendency is to just kind of drape it across the floor and leave it there all day while you're working, and now you're just stepping over that hose time and time again. It's, you know, anytime you're stepping over hoses, you should ask yourself if there's a different way to do it. All right, have a safety meeting. I think before you start any project of building out a brewery, you should have a safety meeting, if not with just yourself, then with your staff for sure. And I don't mean the old school, you know, in a brewery when we talk about having a safety meeting, we mean go out in the loading dock and smoke the weed. You know. You should probably not do that if you are looking to be successful. But think about the safety aspects of the brewery, and a lot of this comes down to all the other points I've been talking about, which is the ergonomics, the traffic flow. These are the basics of safety. But have a safety plan that you're going to roll out, especially when it comes to forklifts. Like don't install brewing equipment in this fashion as these guys with very creative forklift abilities. That's actually a real picture, by the way. It's pretty scary. Put in safety showers. You know, OSHA says you have to have a safety shower within 10 seconds of anybody trying to find it in any kind of room environment. So you really need to think about the person that wants to find a safety shower may be blinded by chemicals, you know, or certainly they've got something on them that they want to get off really fast. So it can't be like you're in the cellar and the safety shower is upstairs around the corner and down the hall. That's not going to work. So put these things in. They're kind of expensive, yes, but you're better off spending a few bucks there than having somebody's, you know, skin peeled off in the hospital. So this guy with the with the great expression on the fork truck, that's from a short film called Stoppler Fahrer Klaus, which is a German short industrial safety movie. It was made back in 2000. If you haven't seen it, you should look it up on YouTube. It's hilarious. The poor fork truck driver, he does end up getting decapitated as his fork goes down the road. But, pretty funny stuff. Last thing, you may definitely want to start thinking about your lab spaces, because too often breweries get built, they get expanded, and then the lab is just very much an afterthought. You know, you take a broom closet, and you say, well, can we put something in here? Is there room for a microscope in here? Plan it in up front, because breweries that do not have laboratories going forward are not going to be breweries for very long. You're going to go out of business. And I've always felt I'm not much of a great businessman, but the first rule of being in business is to stay in business. And the way you stay in business is by having a robust quality program built around your business, especially in beer. Tasting beer is very important, but it's even better if you can taste it in an organized setting, sitting down, analyzing it, and also backing that up with some with the analytics that you need to do on your day-to-day cellar operations. It's pretty important stuff. And it's not very expensive, really, if you think about it overall, compared to pulling beer back out of the marketplace. That's expensive, and more importantly, it ruins your reputation. And that's what we sell. We sell our reputations. We don't actually sell, well, we sell beer, but what makes it sell again is the reputation of the last purchase. So think about that. Thank you. Any questions, comments? I know you all want to get out of the meeting, so good.
Out of, on to.